30 years ago, I had a dream. I was gunning to be a hotshot ad exec, wearing power suits and stiletto heels and vampire red lipstick. I was studying here at McGill in the Bronfman building, just down the street, the same building where I now teach. Overnight, everything changed. My roommate dragged me to a film festival, a feminist film festival. Back then, I had no idea what feminism was. Together, we attended a screening. It was a documentary about the plight of women around the world. Throughout the film, I was sick to my stomach, learning about female genital cutting, women being stoned to death, girls being trafficked as sex slaves. I had no idea any of this was happening. No idea. How could I not know that millions of women around the world were suffering like that? That night, I went from material girl to social justice warrior. I started volunteering for women's organizations. I devoured the classics of first, second, and third wave feminism. I knew what feminism meant. I also learned about neoliberalism and hegemony and praxis. It was intoxicating to shed my old world views like a snake loses its skin. That documentary was my first nudge from the universe. Fast forward a decade. I was at the opening session of a conference and 4 people were up on stage, each a survivor of a different genocide. Rwanda, Cambodia, Bosnia, and the Holocaust. Esther Mujawayo got up to speak. Behind her was a photograph projected onto a giant screen. She said, "You see these 40 people in this picture? That's my extended family, gathered for a family celebration." Shortly thereafter, the massacre began. I survived. My daughter survived. Everyone else, gone. The room felt silent, and she continued. "You Westerners tell me, if only we had known it was happening, we'd have done something. I hear that all the time. Well, I'm calling your bluff, because it's still happening. All over the world, people are suffering, and you continue to fail us." Listening to her, I felt my ears burning, like they were on fire, and like she was talking directly to me. Esther's rebuke was my second nudge from the universe. In 2008, I landed in Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. I was there with my sister to help a women's collective launch a microfinance project. That summer, we met the most extraordinary women. Women without an education, without employment, living in absolute poverty. Some had lost children, some had adopted orphans. They sang hymns together, still grieving. They also danced and laughed together with the courage to face another day. We hadn't planned on shooting video testimonials, but survivors wanted to share their stories, and they wanted to have their experiences documented. One of those survivors was a minister. His family had taken refuge in a church until they were discovered by the génocidaires. They slaughtered his wife and his 7 children before his very eyes. There was nothing he could do to protect them. Somehow he managed to escape, running 30 miles barefoot to a friend's house, and he hid under their kitchen floorboards for 2 months, tormented by nightmares. As I listened to his story, I felt faint. I could barely breathe, and I wanted to vomit. For a whole day afterwards, I felt paralyzed. I couldn't wrap my head around the horror that he'd endured. I couldn't understand the inhumanity of the genocide, and I couldn't reconcile their poverty with our abundance. I had desperately wanted to heed Esther's call to action. Instead, I felt like a genocide tourist. Yes, we had helped buy 10 sewing machines for a co-op of 400 women that they could generate income, but that felt like a drop in the bucket. But what was the alternative? Do nothing? A few months before the trip, I had a meeting with Michael, my thesis advisor. We were catching up and I told him about my volunteer plans. And he said, "Anita, I don't think you're going to graduate unless you change your thesis topic completely. When I hear you talk about your trip to Africa, you light up," and these are his words, "like a Christmas tree. But that's not how you feel about your research. I bet you have a box at home, maybe a drawer, some place that you use to collect random stuff. I want you to find it and go see what's there. I think that's how you're going to discover what you're really inspired by." I remember leaving his office livid. How dare he question what I was passionate about? But 2 weeks later, I got over my ego and I searched my apartment from top to bottom, and what do you know? I did have a secret stash. In my filing cabinet, after my taxes, was a folder marked miscellaneous. I remember spreading the contents across my dining room table. There were ticket stubs from speaking engagements I'd been to. There were lots of yellowed newspaper clippings. Something about acid rain, something about the HIV/AIDS crisis in South Africa, something about homelessness. I honestly did not see the common thread until I came across a little story about a boy in Ontario who had gone to school for a week without wearing shoes because he wanted to understand the realities of childhood poverty in the global South and raise a little awareness at school, maybe a few dollars. That's when it clicked. I was naturally drawn to people who wanted to create positive change in the world. Michael's intervention was my third nudge from the universe. Thanks to him, I did change my thesis topic. My new goal was to understand what motivated changemakers, because I wanted to design curricula that would inspire the next generation. So I interviewed dozens of social entrepreneurs working on all sorts of issues: global literacy, women's empowerment, access to healthcare. I was completely agnostic to their cause. I just wanted to know what they had in common. And my data revealed a simple and elegant answer: empathy. Empathy is what inspired them into action. That's how I came to realize that empathy is our superpower, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. Not just to understand what it is and how it works, but to leverage it on purpose, to transform our relationships and our workplaces, to transform our lives and the world. Now, you might be surprised to learn that it starts small, and it always starts with you. Consider the neuroscience. Did you know that we have the power to change our neural networks just by thinking different thoughts and behaving in different ways? I remember when I first came across this research, I started doing all sorts of experiments and random acts of kindness. And I remember being in a long lineup at a FedEx store during the holiday season about 10 years ago, before we had phones to distract us. And I waited for 30 minutes till I got to the counter, and the woman who greeted me was rude. And I mean nasty rude. My first reaction was to call rank on her and say, I don't know, who do you think you are to talk to me like that? But instead, I looked at her in the eye and I said, "Are you okay?" And she looked at me, trying to discern whether or not I was being sincere. And then she burst into tears. And she said, "I've been working double shifts for 2 weeks straight, and my son's at home with a fever. I think I'm getting sick. It's 3 p.m. I haven't had a lunch break. I'm just flat out exhausted." And I reached out across the counter and we held hands. We were perfect strangers locked in an empathic embrace. Empathy is our superpower. Empathy is our superpower. It's what unites us in our common humanity. But today, it's missing in action. In fact, I think we're living in the era of a massive collective empathy deficit. 8 men have the same combined wealth as half of humanity, while 2 billion people on the planet lack access to safe drinking water. We plunder the planet as though there are no limits to growth, to hell with the next generations that have to deal with the consequences. We're also drowning in a culture of consumerism and hyper-individualism, but humans need purpose and communion and a sense of belonging to thrive. No wonder we're in a mental health crisis, with rates of depression and anxiety, self-harm, addiction, suicide, and violence all going up, especially among youth. Then there's misogyny and racism and all the other forms of bigotry. Why are we so invested in perpetuating inequality? Don't all human beings deserve love and happiness and dignity? I don't pretend to have the answers to the challenges that we are facing in this world, but here's what I do know. The world needs more empathy. We need more empathy. In our homes, in our classrooms, in our workplaces, in our public policies. In fact, we need it to survive. It's been part of our successful evolution as a species. The good news is that we're all capable of empathy straight out of the womb. And guess what? It's good for us. Did you know that when we are feeling emotionally connected with someone, the same pleasure and reward centers of our brain light up as though we were high on psychedelics or eating a delicious piece of chocolate cake? Practicing empathy on purpose will make you happier and healthier. And at scale, it can elevate humanity and change the world. So, what are we waiting for? It's time to elevate our empathic consciousness. It's time to tap our hidden superpower. And that's what my book invites you to do. Purposeful Empathy is an invitation for us all to turn up the volume of empathy in our lives. And my biggest hope, after 12 years of work, is that when you read this book, it will be your nudge from the universe. Thank you.